I can hardly believe it myself, but this story is 100% true. It all began when I was just a 13-year-old boy, hanging out with my two friends, Mark and Emily, at my house one dark and stormy night. My parents were out of town, and we were left alone, searching for something to do to pass the time. As we rummaged through the cluttered basement, our eyes fell upon an old wooden box hidden beneath dusty blankets and forgotten junk. Intrigued, we opened it and found a withered Ouija board. None of us have ever seen it before, and curiosity piqued our interest. After a few hours of playing games and feeling the night grow darker around us, we decided to give the Ouija board a try. It was a cliché horror movie setup, but we didn't think anything of it at the time. With trembling hands, we placed our fingers lightly on the planchette and began to ask the questions. Is there anyone here with us?" Mark whispered hesitantly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the planchette started to move, spelling out the words, "Yes." We exchanged nervous glances, unsure if one of us was moving it intentionally. "Who are you?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. The planchette continued to move on its own, spelling out, "It's me." Loud banging suddenly echoed through the basement walls, and we froze in fear. It was as if something unseen was trying to get our attention from within the very structure of the house. Goosebumps crawled up my arms. Emily's eyes widened as she whispered, "Did you hear that?" But it got worse. From the basement bathroom, a low, guttural growl rumbled, sending chills down our spines. Our hearts raced as we exchanged terrified glances. Before we could react, Mark suddenly went limp, collapsing onto the floor in the midst of a violent seizure. His body contorted in unnatural ways, and his eyes rolled back into his head. Emily and I screamed in sheer panic, unable to comprehend what was happening. In desperation, we grabbed Mark's trembling limbs, not knowing how to help him. That's when I noticed the Ouija board still on the table, its planchette quivering and spelling out words on its own. It said, "You will die." Driven by terror and adrenaline, we pushed the planchette to goodbye and quickly shoved the board back into its box. Miraculously, Mark's convulsions stopped, and he lay there unconscious but breathing. As we waited for him to regain consciousness, we couldn't help but feel that we had awakened something malevolent that night. Mark finally stirred, but when he woke up, he had no memory of what had just occurred. It was as if the traumatic episode had been wiped from his mind. We swore never to speak of that night again, and vowed never to touch the Ouija board. However, the horror was far from over. In the weeks that followed, strange and unsettling things began to happen in my house. I would hear inexplicable noises in the middle of the night, whispers, footsteps, and eerie laughter. Objects would move on their own, and shadows would dart across the walls. I tried to tell my parents about it, but they dismissed it as mere imagination or the effects of watching too many scary movies. They heard none of the haunting sounds that kept me awake at night. But I knew it was the Ouija board. We had unleashed something malevolent that refused to leave, and it was tormenting me alone. My friends Mark and Emily had no recollection of that night, but I couldn't forget. I was trapped in a waking nightmare, alone in a house filled with the presence of an evil entity. So, I'm telling you this story now, not to seek sympathy or understanding, but to warn you. Be careful what you awaken, for some things, once released, may never let go. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it happened years ago. It was a hot summer night in our small town, and my 3 friends and I gathered for a sleepover. I was just 12 years old at the time, and we were full of that reckless curiosity that only kids can possess. We had heard countless tales about the house down the street, the one with the ominous history and the legend of a serial killer who had once lived there. The stories that whispered through the town painted a gruesome picture of a man who had not only taken lives, but consumed them, a cannibalistic fiend. As we huddled together in my dimly lit room, my friends Lisa, Sarah, and Emma, we couldn't resist the allure of the forbidden. That night, we decided to play with the Ouija board. We had secretly borrowed it from Lisa's older brother. We knew it was risky, but we were confident we could handle it. 4 candles flickered in the corners of the room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. We placed our hands lightly on the planchette and in hushed voices called out to the spirits. "Is anybody there? Can you hear us?" we asked, our eyes locked on the board. For a while, nothing happened, and we exchanged nervous glances. But then, an unexpected gust of wind extinguished all 4 candles simultaneously. The room plunged into darkness, and an unsettling silence enveloped us. We froze, too afraid to breathe. As the seconds stretched into eternity, our eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, and that's when we saw it, a shadow figure, lurking at the far end of the hallway. It was a chilling, indistinct silhouette, but its presence was unmistakable. We all screamed, and I could feel the terror wash over us like a tidal wave. "Did you see that?" Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. We fumbled for the light switch, desperate to banish the darkness and reveal that it was all just a trick of our overreactive imaginations. But when the room was flooded with light, the hallway was empty. The shadow figure had vanished as if it had never been there. We were left shaken and terrified, our faces pale and our hearts racing. Emma spoke first, her voice shaky.
"Guys, we have to put this thing away right now. We didn't say goodbye to the spirits, and we can't just leave it like this."
We quickly closed the Ouija board, our hands trembling as we carefully placed it back in its box. We never played with it again, and that night marked the end of our reckless fascination with the supernatural. Now I know it might sound like a typical ghost story, something out of a scary movie, but I swear to you, every word of this story is true. We never spoke about that night again, but the memory haunts me to this day. The house down the street, the legends, the Ouija board, and the shadow figure, they were all real, and the evil energy that clung to that place was undeniable.